And welcome to the December 13th meeting of the Planning Policy Commission. Tonight we're going to talk about the amendments to the comprehensive plan. And if anybody would like to make any comments, we'll be glad to hear them. I see lots of people out there. But first of all, we have to, now that we have an official quorum, we have two things. We have the approval of the minutes from November the 8th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I would like to move to approve the minutes of November 8th.
Second.
Do I have any discussion? You've all read them, so the motion is on the table. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to the minutes of November the 15th. Do I have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve minutes from November 15th.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. With that, I'm going to open up the floor to our planning policy manager for an update on what the amendments are to the comp plan.
Perfect. Tonight is the culmination of the 2018 comp plan amendments that we do annually. Just to remind you, in January, we did the docket list. We had a public hearing, and you added some items to the docket list. That went through council. Council approved the docket list, and we started working on those items. We've brought you items, 3 different meetings. We did the whole land use element, the first meeting with you all, and the parks update. And remember, the parks element we updated based on the park strategic plan. We just pulled all those policies from that adopted plan into the comprehensive plan element, so that was pretty basic. Then in the 27th, Kristen was here telling you all about the transportation element. There was just a few changes to the element itself, and we also included the transportation improvement program that you'd previously seen earlier in the year and council had previously adopted. By state law, that has to also be brought into the transportation element, so that's sort of a housekeeping, shall we say, measure to pull that into the adopted new element. And then we had you also did the implementation strategies, where we tried to prioritize and get a finer grain on the implementation strategies for the whole comp plan. And so that was kind of an interesting discussion we had on all the projects we would love to do. Then we had a really great discussion with the school board and the school district about urban schools and compact schools and what their expectations are and what your expectations are. And we had a super great discussion with them, which ended up to have some compact school policies, some urban school policies, and 2 definitions of urban schools and compact schools for you all. Tonight, you're going to be seeing 2 pieces that you haven't seen before, and one of those is the utilities public service element, and the other one is capital facilities element. And the reason these are coming later than we would have liked is the water system plan, which is a huge document that's moving through the council right now, is supposed to be adopted by them, we're hoping, in January. And we need to put the policies in the water service plan and make sure they're in our comprehensive plan, because our comprehensive plan is the umbrella of everything in the city. And so we've put those in, and so it's just like the park plan and the park element, that we're trying to make the comprehensive plan the holder of all that's current. And so you'll be getting a presentation by Emily on that tonight. For capital facilities, we were not going to update that because, as you all know, parts of it are very out of date and need to have rate studies, and for the LOS for fire, police, the list goes on. But as we started the work on the fire impact fees, we realized that there was no capital plan for future capital facilities that are needed by fire in the plan because it's so old. And so we needed to tuck those into this go-around so we could update the fees next year. Otherwise, we couldn't get them in till next year, at the end of the year, and we couldn't do the fire impact fees then till 2020. So we wanted to quick get those in. And also from all of our discussions with the school impact fees, we took another look at what Growth Management Act requires us to say about the school district's 6-year plan. And we made sure that our element says exactly what GMA says we have to say about the school district plan so that we are able to have school impact fees. Just as a quick summary, the land use element that you saw in September, it updated the population, housing data, and the job data. We updated the land use designation map, transfer of development rights, policy direction for building on slopes, acquisition of forested hillsides, yay, and we had the policy for compact and urban schools. And at the end, as you may recall, Lindsay wrote a great email right after she got the packet, thank you very much, of all the questions she had, and then staff tried to answer them all and got it back to you all on Monday. And so if anyone wants to go over any or all of that email and the questions she had, we're happy to do that. Part of that she brought up was the interesting way that the population projections are calculated. And we thought she made a very good point that they were probably more complicated for forecasting than they had to be, knowing that forecasting is never absolutely correct. There's many variables that are part of that, none of which we have a crystal ball and can guess them accurately every time. So we simplified them, like Lindsay had mentioned, to just be divided by how many years, the growth divided by how many years, so that there's not, we even contacted the planner that had done this before for many years, and she agreed, yes, it was pretty convoluted. It made sense at the time, but if I were you, with the end of the development agreements and Central, going strong now and the moratorium being over, she goes, I would just go back to having it be straightforward. We said, okay. So the highlighted areas in yellow are different than in your packet based on Lindsay's question and are delving into the formulas a little better. And those are much more straightforward.
So the question that I had there was basically that if our most recent growth, and I'm having to find it on here, but I believe it was something like 6%, why we were looking at closer to 1 to 2% in the future years. I can't quite read that up there, so I don't know what you corrected to.
I think it's now, the first change from 2010 to 2018 is now 2.74%, which is accurate because it is 2018. But the other two then, as we project from 19 to 2020, we just took the growth and divided it by the years. So it's pretty much the same as it is from 210 to 218. And then we did a similar formula for 2020 to 2025, and that went down to 1.86%.
Okay, let me see if I get this correctly in my head. So what was in our packet was a 6.8% average yearly growth.
Right.
For a total increase of 21.95%. But what you're correcting to is saying, well, it didn't actually grow 22% over that 8-year period because a growth of from 30,434 people to 36,715 is not 21%.
Right.
Okay, so we have now the corrected numbers, which is good, and it shows similar to slightly decreasing growth over those periods rather than rapidly dropping growth, which didn't make sense. Okay.
Right. And while we're on the table, you had asked two really good questions. Why are the Highlands and Talus, why are those numbers changing now that it's 2018? And because we did the end of development agreements, we actually knew what was left entitled and what wasn't. And so there are actually existing conditions in this chart, whereas all the years before, we just gave them their entitlement and we never questioned if they're going to make it or not because they had so much time to get their entitlement. And so now that we knew that things were over, we adjusted them all to end the development agreement, use existing conditions for this year, and then in the future, just to put the remaining entitlement that was agreed upon in the development agreement ending for the future years.
Yeah.
So that's why this one looks a little different than it has for many, many years for those two.
Yeah, so it's not like we lost houses, it's just that we were estimating over, and when we had to do the actual count for the end of development agreement, these are now actual numbers.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Any other questions with the pop chart? Transportation was pretty straightforward. Again, it was the 6-year TIP that you had already looked at. It was the Commute Trip Reduction Act information that Kristen presented. We revised the Sound Transit 3 policies a little bit and updated the non-motorized map. And also, the Commute Trip Reduction Act also went into the central plan as well. And some of the wording, we had the new words that they want us to use that are longer than the old words. Still don't quite understand why we have to use a longer word, but there it is. And this is the new word we have to use, the non-drive alone trip instead of single occupancy vehicle. And we added a transportation management action plan to the definitions as well. We already talked about the Parks and Rec element being now the same as the strategic plan. And remember, next year, you all asked to go through the goals and policies again, and you got your wish. It's on the docket for next year, so hoorah for that. And then we also did the implementation strategies. We've already looked at those. We updated them and prioritized them. And these are the new pieces. I'm going to turn it over to Emily, and she's going to share what happened with the 2 new elements.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Emily Arteche. I'm a senior planner here in Development Services. I have some notes at the bottom of the screen. I wanted to display why I gave my brief presentation. Do you mind if I restart the PowerPoint presentation?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Do you know how to do it?
Escape. I think you just hit from beginning.
Do you want them to show more? Because you can do the cursor and make your slides smaller and your notes bigger.
Yeah, but I was just wondering, when you hit the PowerPoint presentation, there's a display that allow you to
that?
show, yeah, without my notes on it, though.
Oh.
Yeah, if you hit,
Oh, so you can see the notes, but they can't see the notes?
yeah, yeah.
Oh, whoops, I don't know how to do that.
Let's see here.
Sorry.
View.
IT, help.
IT help. It's pretty simple, because I've done it many times
I
before.
didn't know you could do that.
Notes.
The slide master,
Yeah. Is it review, slideshow?
that was on view.
Oh,
There was a,
use view presentation automatic, use timing, play narratives, show media controls, use timing, use view presentation, monitor, primary monitor. I might have to just not use them if I can't figure that out.
Can you, I don't think they mind seeing the notes.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Okay.
I mean, it's not like you used any bad words or anything,
We'll see.
as far as I
Thankfully.
know.
So Trish, I'm sorry, where do you just do that?
Yeah, I just stick the cursor so I can see less of the slide.
Uh-huh, and how do you, and pull it up?
Right.
Okay.
And then you would just, when you want to go to that one,
Would
you just.
anybody
click
like
on
to
it.
bring up anything while we're waiting so that everybody knows
All
that
right.
we're actually.
All right, well, you can see my notes, and hopefully I didn't misspell anything on the bottom, because they were not intended for public view. So this is the first time that Trish had, as Trish introduced, that you'll be seeing the water plan. It was last updated in 2012, so it's been a while. And since that, a lot has changed. The city's had the development agreements. There's Talus and Issaquah Highlands and Central Issaquah Plan that was recently adopted, I mean, basically right at the same time that the last water plan was updated. And at the same time, about 1,000 new service connections, South Cove and the Greenwood Point neighborhood came on board. So this water plan is a substantial document. It's equivalent to having a comprehensive plan like the one these amendments are going into. So it is a full-bodied document up to 239 pages, similar to what you'd see for the Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District Water Comprehensive Plan. So it's a substantial document. And if you haven't noticed, there's been a significant increase in the number of policies added to the document. 32 new additional policies came on board, and they deal mostly with water system design and operation. And I also just wanted to mention, too, that as a result of this update, a significant finding in the study that they did to update this plan determined that additional treatment of groundwater would be needed. And then along with that, the 32 new additional policies. And they're very detailed with regards to operation and design, system design. So if you read through them, you'll see a lot of the words of maintenance and indications of fire flow and things like that. And you'll also notice that there's a uniform treatment and information of these policies all geared towards the utility customer, including the one we have right now, as well as future water utility customers. And you may not have noticed, but this was part of a larger public involvement program back in May 2018. The City Council had a public hearing on this. And so it went through a full process in order to get to the point where it's at right now, to have the developed goals and policies in the plan, which we can literally lift and put into our comprehensive plan to provide a proper storage or housing for it. The document is really very large, and it's right now, if you'd like to look at it, I put up the website where you could go and find the document on the Issaquah webpage under issaqua.gov.waterplan. Are there any questions with regards to the water plan update?
Is this the actual, what's actually going to be in the comp plan, or is once the water is approved by the city, then changes are going to come back here?
Right, we did think about that. That's a great question. There are no anticipated changes to the goals and the policies, and for that reason, it is not likely to come back with any additional changes. But should it go through the council and should a change occur, we could address that and or bring it back to you if you prefer.
That would be next year, though.
It would be next year, yeah. It's scheduled to go through to the council on January 22nd.
That was kind of what my question was, is that would we be naturally reviewing this with next year's comp plan when we kind of go through the entire document? Obviously not the new material, but.
If they changed anything between now and January,
Yeah.
you would see it again next year.
So it's my understanding that with the water system plan and city council's review, that there are some questions that are still up in the open, such as fluoridation and, whether or not they're going to move between the three choices of how to provide water. Do any of those affect the policies, or is that just the implementation side?
They're connected.
Okay. So,
The policies then drive the outcomes.
so should there be policies in here about water fluoridation and potentially like the
Treatment.
PFAS treatment
Yeah.
and different things like that?
There could be a fluoride-related policy. At this point, there's not, it's not anticipated, is what the Public Works Department has indicated.
So again, I'm going off of information from outside of this meeting and outside of what we're presented, so excuse me if I say something incorrectly, but my understanding is Issaquah receives 2 sources of water, from groundwater and from, Cascade, is that what it is? Yeah.
Cascade Water Alliance.
Yeah, and one of them is fluoridated and the other one is not. And so that comes in and certain areas are receiving, or they're suggesting that Talus is only going to receive one of those sources of water. And so basically, I think what I'm getting at is it feels like we do not have a lot of the information that would be needed to evaluate the policies behind a water system plan.
I would back that up. I think what I was wondering is if basically this was a little bit like our Parks Department thing, where we're like, this is a good update, and how do we actually then take this and implement policy? I mean, we've dictated a lot of things in the comp plan about what we want for the city. Why do we not have anything that says, this is exactly what we want from our water? Right now, it felt a little bit like, well, we're going to leave it to the utility and, hope it shakes out okay. And so I was kind of wondering if this was like our first stab, and next year we'll be fine-tuning this.
There could be an opportunity for fine-tuning. It is very much like the parks element. So the parks element goals and policies were cultivated through the Parks Department on their own through a separate process, and they asked us to put it into our comprehensive plan. So unlike the land use element and other elements, this is one that the work was done elsewhere, and we were simply asked to put it back into the comprehensive plan. It certainly is, there's an opportunity for us to come back with the utilities element again next year, show you what exactly was adopted from the council, and do any additional work at that time, along with the parks plan.
I'd feel better with that rider moving it along.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't see anything in here that is a problem to put into the comprehensive plan, but I'm a little bit like, I feel kind of floored that that's coming in and I'm like, whoa, what are the questions that should be asked, what are the policies that are going to come out of this and the
What do we
implementation?
do with that information? Like, I felt like we kind of missed a step a little bit, but I didn't feel like it was a negligent thing. I felt like it was like we're still processing what we want our water plan to be. So I appreciated the update and was kind of, after going through it, I kind of realized I was like, all right, well, we'll see what we'll present it tonight. But I kind of wanted to see if this was something that could be a little more in process.
So am I correct hearing that you'd like to see this come back to you again, maybe even at the same time that the parks element comes back?
I don't think they're related as far as when they come to us, but, and especially, I'm not sure when it's coming to us, but I'd like this to have a little bit more time. I don't know that I necessarily want to look at this again in January or February. I want to see what's adopted and be able to actually have you guys take the time to piece out and say, what is our policy plan as far as what is our standards for water? How are we going to get that? What are our checks and levels, rather than just right now, it's just all kind of dumped on the utility, if that makes sense. So I'd like to see it again. I would love to have that rider of, it would make me happy to pass this along, knowing that we were going to readdress how the information actually bakes into our policy.
I would agree.
The only part that comes to mind that I would warn about, and we'd have to check with Public Works, is the water system plan is regulated by the state, whereas the parks plan is not. And so let's say next year you looked at the goals and policies and you had changes. I'm not sure how often we're allowed to go to the state with changes. I'm not aware, because that's not a program that we've ever been in charge of. You know, we usually put whatever they've adopted through their public process into our comp plan. So we could see on, you know, if you worked on the policies and goals, if we would be able to actually amend them before the next roll through of the water system plan.
So Lindsay brought up the question of fluoridation. That's not determined by the state. I mean, in the way that
No.
there are two different things coming in.
Right.
One
no.
has fluoride, one does not. So the state is not going to do
Right.
that. It comes from the city.
Right, they regulate when we have to update the
Right.
water system
Once a-
plan.
well,
I
every-
think it's every 6 or 8 years, it's something like that. Like the comp plan is every year. So I'm just worried that if you should change things, I'm not sure when the state would let us actually put those amendments in play.
When's the deadline? Just submit to the state? When is the,
I'm not sure, because that's Public Works' process, and they hope to be adopted in January. But we'll certainly run that through to see if we're able to do that like we are with the parks element.
Yeah, I actually heard some of the commissioners indicate that they wanted maybe more of an in-depth understanding of the water plan. Is that correct, of how it functions and works?
That,
Right, in theory, you would, the city, I'm sorry, I don't mean you, Emily, would take that in-depth research and then be able to parlay that into what is it that we want to see for our city. And maybe that means something, you know, fluoridation is an example of something where we have a disconnect and something where we may hold ourselves to a higher standard than what the utility may bring us. And so then what are we going to do to create that situation where we kind of have our own plan, we create policies for the water plan based on that study.
so it wouldn't be the entire plan, because obviously we don't need to go into detail about where pipes and connections and, you know, all of those things. But the policies around what our water treatment should be like for our city, whether or not, again, we have higher standards or something like that, I think is something that we'd like to talk about. So I don't know how that meshes in with the water system plan and when it's required to be
Right.
submitted,
Right,
or
we'll
if it's
follow-
even
We'll
Right.
follow up
ability,
on
but
that.
The next update is in 10 years after this, so.
Oh, it's 10
It's a 10-year update, yes.
So the plan has not been adopted by council, so they could add in there whatever they want.
They could,
Right.
and if they change something, I think it would be more important to bring it back and show you what those changes are.
Okay, so with the input from the commissioners that there are a few things that need to be added, would that discussion then go to the council as you're presenting the plan? So they, at that point in time, they could put specific things into the plan that do not have to be actually addressed in this policy statement right here.
Let me
Right.
see if I understand what you're saying. If they put something additional into the plan, it doesn't affect what you have before you right now. If they change specifically the policies or the goals that are in that plan,
Well, that's
then
true.
then it would affect what you see right here.
Right.
That's true, but adding in a description of what the water quality should be like.
Yeah, it would not
I don't
affect.
know if
Yeah,
that's-
that might not affect at all the goals and the policies that
Right.
you have before you. Yeah, correct. And it's not likely that the goals and policies are going to change, and that's why we felt comfortable bringing these to you at this point.
Right.
So if we felt like they were volatile and they were change and shifting, we wouldn't have been able to bring it
Right.
forward.
And the council will be done with that before they're done with this. So if they do change things, they would be able to put the changes also into the comp plan if they
Okay,
choose.
so
Because
it
they're
will be
seeing this
taken care of.
after that. Right. But then we would bring it back to you to show you what the final piece was and see if
Okay,
you had any
I
issues
think that's
with
exactly
it.
what you're asking, I think. Okay,
I think so.
okay.
Great. The other element that has some minor changes to it, again, it's only minor because we don't have all the the impact fee study done, is to the fire services, which needed a 6-year CIP listed in there. So you'll see that there's a new table in there that shows that a new fire aid unit is going to be needed, as well as a new fire station. And so those are numbers that will help with the city's future planning efforts moving forward once they're established in the city's comprehensive plan. And then there's another minor edit to schools, which indicates the latest CIP for Issaquah School District as of dated this year in 2018.
So how do you set impact fees, the amount of impact fees? What is it that the city is looking for?
We're doing a rate study right now where we look at their calls for service, the facilities that they have now, meaning the buildings and the vehicles, and we find out if all of that matches still with what they were before, and if we're able to keep the level of service up for the growth that we're expecting. And fire is a little different than the others in that fire, we try to be ahead of the curve, and then the people that come later sort of do a, not a latecomer's fee, but it's sort of, we don't want to be behind in fire service and build up to the growth. We would rather be, we've chosen to be ahead of growth, and then the latecomers pay into it so that the system is already built for a little bit of growth, so we have a buffer there that we don't drop below. And when we start to drop below, there's the chart in there that you'll see when we update them next year on when you sort of get to that danger, how many minutes does it take to get to a call? And that's when they need the new aid car and the new facility so that they don't drop below how many minutes it takes for them to get to the emergencies.
So when was the last time it was updated?
2006.
I was going to say, right. It was a while ago.
2006. So are you sure that we are meeting our goals right now?
Yes, because we did start the update, and that's when we realized that the future piece was missing out of the capital facilities. We totally missed it because it's from 2006. So that's why that had to go in here so we could keep doing the rate study and adopt new fees and a new rate study this next year.
I understand that you have to do it in the
Oh.
future to base it on it, but I was just, from your explanation, I was concerned that 2006 is a long distance from 2018.
Right.
And I think we had this discussion several times before that fire and police were not necessarily updated to the right standard.
Right, and you're right that the rate study wasn't updated, but fire continues to do everything they normally do with or without a rate study that we would do for them. I mean, they've been putting in the facilities that they need and the vehicles they need. You know, they've been carrying on,
that was just,
thankfully without us, trying to keep
Well,
up.
that concermed me, that there's
Right.
such a, you're supposed to do 6 years, well, we are at, 12 years?
Right, right. But no, they've been carrying on really well without us keeping up as well as we should have.
Yeah, and that's why you see the aid card listed in the future in 2023. It's something they're predicting they need by that time.
I would like to make one request.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the transport, I guess it's the utilities, the water, the amendments that are here, you have everything in yellow.
Right.
It's
we're gonna
very
change that, right.
difficult to
Read
know if
yellow.
I've missed something because it all blends together, so.
Okay.
In the other amendments, you're fine. You have it in red, and so you can see the difference between the two, but it's very difficult in this situation.
Good point. Thank you.
So does anybody have any questions? Concerns?
The whole thing?
I think, Trish, you have one more slide, don't you, for next steps?
Oh, sure.
I just have one question on the fire service area before we move on. Considering we know that there's going to need to be a new fire station north of the I-90, when does that come up within the city of locating that, what that parcel would be? I know that's not part of the comprehensive plan, but that obviously comes up with this information.
I would guess that fire is looking for one as we speak, just because, as we know from schools, the parcels are hard to find. So I
Yeah.
would guess that fire is in the process of looking now, knowing that it might take them till when they would need it to find one, to find a suitable spot.
So fire has already done a response study, basically. So it's, think about something with like concentric circles for you could get to this line in this many minutes and this line in this many minutes. So they know where optimally that new facility would be. And we actually acquired a piece of property on East Lake Sammamish with that intent. Unfortunately, I think what we found is that that piece of property can't accommodate a fire station, so we're looking for another piece of property. So, you know, as we know with the school district, finding property is not easy in Issaquah. And so we actually have a meeting with the chief maybe next week, where they're going to help us understand kind of their optimization map so that we can then go look for property. So it's I mean, they would build a temporary station tomorrow if they could. We've actually talked to some property owners kind of along East Lake Sam and kind of back behind where Siemens and Microsoft are to see if there's property that those property owners would be willing to allow a temporary fire station to sublease for a while. So those things are all happening right now.
Right.
And I think part of, you know, the goal for us is having that north station would alleviate, you know, the way our arrangement is with Eastside Fire and Rescue is if something in the city of Issaquah is served by a station in Sammamish, we pay a surcharge. And right now, basically to get to Providence Point, they're coming from Sammamish. So that's the problem we're trying to solve. And I think it's, you know, I think we're on as fast a track as we can. As soon as we find property, then, assuming it's in the city, we then have to purchase it because stations built in the city of Issaquah are built and paid for by the city. So that's
Fantastic.
a
Thank
big
you.
capital expense, right?
Anything else on that? Whoa, we're in a whole different place. There we go. Shazam. These would be the next steps. Should you decide to move it forward tonight, it would go in January to the council, and the Council Land and Shore Committee would review it. And I guess now that the January meetings cancel, it would be February and March for Land and Shore. And then we would be done in, hopefully in March. They just canceled the January Land and Shore. I didn't update my slide. But we'd hope to be done in March then. Any questions about the process or any of the amendments or?
I'd like to go back to the transportation element of this. And I'm looking at this lovely sheet that we do every year, and I understand that past a certain year, it's hope that we can get the funds. It's something that we think that maybe there's a possibility of getting. So under 2019, are all of those funds,
And do you know what page it is, Joan?
doesn't have it's the transportation capital request,
49, is that what you're on?
page something 9 of 69. I can't read
I think
it.
it might be 49.
49 of 98.
And are you asking if all of 2019 is funded?
Yes.
Typically, most of it should be. Shouldn't it be if it's in the 2019? I mean, not being the transportation engineer and having this have been adopted, I would think that most of 2019 should be ready to go. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in 2019. But I'd have to check to be completely sure that 2019 is funded.
I would hope that you have the funds for, I understand the further out, that
Correct,
those
is
are
not.
things that you hope and assume that you're going to apply for grants and have funds from the city. But when you're in 2019, I'm assuming that those things are being done, like $6 million for the 43rd Way.
Providence Point.
Oh, yeah, 43rd should be done by sometime next year, right? Or not 43rd,
It
I'm
wasn't
sorry, I'm thinking
specifically in the
62nd.
budget, was it?
So part of the budget deliberations, there was a very brief discussion that there are a certain number of transportation projects that I think the council thought were fully funded that are not. And that was a $14 million number of unfunded projects that I think the council thought were funded. The Providence Point signal, and there were a number of people from Providence Point that came to the council budget deliberations. That particular project is somewhere around $8 million of unfunded appropriation. Councilmember Ray, as part of his recommendations to include in the budget, was funding that unfunded $8 million, which then started a conversation amongst the council about, well, how do we talk about one and not the entire 13? But in the end of the day, they did include that $8 million from Providence Point in either in the budget or in the council president's letter with the budget. So somewhere it's immortalized that the council is going to have another conversation about that $8 million and fund that project, I think, next year. Sorry, it's December. So the answer is there are a number of things that are not completely funded. So the hard thing is, so you look at like TR 23, which is Newport Maple to Sunset, and you see there's an appropriation in 2019, but then you also can see there's appropriations in 2020, 2021. So right now, if you were to ask if that project was completely funded, it is not. There is an appropriation that's set aside for 19, but you also need to get those future appropriations to make that project actually work.
I assume that there's going to be follow-on. I just wondered if what was actually in 2019 was funded. Whatever portion of those projects were being done, at least they were being worked on. Like Providence Point, that's been in the plan for 20 years now.
Right. So, and I think I answered specifically Providence Point. The rest of this thing, I do not want to speak authoritatively on the TIP. Super not my ball of wax. We were more than happy to. We might be bringing some Public Works Engineering's folks to the next PPC meeting because I think it would be helpful to have Bob York here for a conversation about the water plan. So if PPC would like additional conversation about the TIP, because the TIP is incorporated into the comp plan, so you guys kind of touch it.
Right, they looked at it in April.
So if you have questions, I think we might want to have maybe Sheldon come and answer those.
Okay.
I mean, it depends on how deep you want to get into the weeds. I'm good at like this level. If you want to be down here, I'm going to say probably not me.
No, I just basically, I assume that if you put it in a particular year, that you, especially since it's next year, that you would have some understanding that, yes, indeed, we have that particular money to work on, instead of, well, yeah, but I'm going to put it over here, no, I'm going to put it back here. You have at least some semblance of order.
Yes.
And that's the kind of answer.
Other questions?
Anything else?
Yes, the fire services area, if that's a 6-year period, shouldn't that be updated in the implementation actions on the longer-term ones? That should also, basically, it should be in the longer-term actions for 2024, and it's not listed there on page 89 of 98.
And which one's not where the fire?
So let's see, what did we call it? The capital facilities plan? That should be updated at a 6-year period, correct?
Correct, and we have it in 219 to 220. And so you're saying put it back in the future year?
Yeah, because particularly if we missed doing it one time, I think it would be important to have that future date in there so that we don't miss doing it again.
And you would put it in the longer term or the short term? The longer term?
Well, it should be in the longer-term actions. If it's supposed to be a 6-year update, then it would be 2024, 2025.
Okay. Okay, good catch. Any other comments? Thoughts?
I have one minor question. In the transportation element, there is a goal to get 17% of the trips into biking and walking. What is that going to do to the overall transportation plan? If 17% only is doing that, how is that going to help?
I think, and what page are you on? Is that just in Central that we're trying to, I thought that was just a Central goal to get more transit or more ped, bike, and transit?
It could be. So how did you come up with the goal of 17%? And what does that do to the transportation itself in the city?
Right. When we did the original transportation work for Central and we figured out what our mode split between single occupancy vehicle, I'm still going to call them that for a while, and all others, transit, ped, bike, I think we were at 7% non-SOV bike. And so we were saying that in 20 years or whatever, I think it was a 20-year time period, we wanted to double it through more transit, more bikes, more peds, and through just the way the Central was going to be designed, it would be much easier to be a ped and a bike, and we'd be denser, so hopefully we'd have more transit. So that would help us to double what the existing condition was, I think, at 7 when we first started. And that should help the whole city, because then it won't be, the inside would be working much better because of all those options, and so then it would help the outer as well. And I know we're updating concurrency next year, so we'll get to see how we're doing, I hope, to see if we're any closer to that 17%.
Okay, we're basing our goals for the city in the way of transportation, our amendments, our everything that we write is based on getting more bike-friendly, getting more walkability. And I'm looking at 17%, and I'm not seeing a huge reduction in traffic. And I'm looking at all of the improvements and the ways to work with all the businesses to get transportation better in the city. How are we doing? You know, that's great, but we still have this flow through that is causing all our problems. So, you know, it's kind of hard if we got to do something on both sides.
Right.
You know, you're going to put all this new construction into the city, like that new complex that's going on behind Safeway, which is huge.
Vale.
It's going to affect the traffic in the city. It has to. You can live, work, and play in the city, but 99% of the people are working outside, and that traffic is still going to be going in and out, so.
Right, and
Through.
And part of that I'd answer with the concurrency update to let us know, I'm hoping, how we're doing. You know, it's sort of like another snapshot of time, how we're doing since the last time we updated concurrency in 2015. I think we adopted it in January. And also, there's the Transportation Advisory Board that's getting put together as we speak. They just finished their interviews for that, and they're going to be going through a year or two of putting together the Master Mobility Plan, which is going to have all the different parts. It'll have transit, non-motorized. It'll start looking, I would imagine, at ST3 once they get further along. But they're also going to look closer at the city's transportation issues, because that keeps coming up, of course, as the city's biggest problem, biggest challenge, I should say. And so they're going to be looking at different ways that we can help the flow through and the internal and all of that kind of thing. And hopefully we'll be updating you as we move through that process so that you're aware of what the transportation group is doing.
I hope they're good at their jobs.
Kristen was in all the interviews.
Because it's hard. It's
And
going
she
to be
said-
hard to
Yeah,
be able
she said the
to
people were
support the
just
city.
super good that they interviewed, so she's pretty excited about the new commission.
So is there anything else?
No, not from me.
Is there
Any
anything
other
else
from you all?
commission?
I had a question on page 28, and specifically regarding our climate change, and we have projections for reducing citywide greenhouse gases.
Yes.
I was curious if we're on track for that 25% by 2020 right now. I know that this isn't an official update, but when I saw that, I was curious if we're still, obviously, we're intending to meet those targets as we've kept them as our policy, but, you know, with this being
I would have to ask David Fujimoto in our Office of Sustainability, because you're right, that would be coming up in 2 years.
I was just kind of curious, you know, with that first benchmark, how close we are to hitting it, and to give a gauge of how good we are on track with those numbers.
It's a good question.
My other question was on page 25 regarding our tree canopy. I seem to recall
Next year.
a while ago, there
Oh.
was a suggestion from the public about a catalog of our trees, and actually, you know, of that tree retention and being able to actually monitor, you know, if our green necklace is one of our treasures, that's also made up of our, you know, obviously our tree canopy, and with using current satellite imagery, drone technology, being able to actually map and know what is our trees and if we're losing them, and if there had been any traction on creating a policy around that?
Right. In the Park Strategic Plan, one of their work items for next year is to redo, you know, and analyze again the city's tree canopy, see where we are on our goal, see if we're doing better or if we're
Right.
the same or not so great. And then on the docket for next year is once we get the report from the Parks Department and their work on the tree canopy, then we would update our tree canopy policies and goals in the comp plan once we see the new data on how we're doing, because maybe we're doing great and, you know, we need to maintain and keep going, or maybe not so great, and then we need to think of new things to do. But yeah, that's great. That's been on the, people have been wanting to update that for a while.
Great, thank you.
So is there any other concerns, questions about what is in front of you?
The big packet, you guys did a lot of work. We really appreciate it. It's, you know, we see the nitty-gritty throughout the year, and it shows in something like this, so.
Thank you. I have a great team.
I think it's hard to understand how difficult it is to pull all these pieces together and get the right wording based on what the city, what the county, what the state all wants to put together. And sometimes I think we have a tendency not to understand that and want specifics that really can't be put in there the way that we want. So I think it looks really good.
Oh, good.
So with that, I need a motion to approve.
Did you want to open the public hearing?
Okay, I will open up the public hearing at 7:29. Is there anybody that would like to make any comment? Is there anybody that would like to make a comment? Needing to do it 3 times, is there anybody else that would like to make any public comment? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing at 7:29 and a half.
Perfect.
Lindsay, how do you want to word the kind of, it sounds like we want to add a rider to approval right now of coming back to the water plan?
I don't know. So basically, we're asking to,
Because I think right now we're wanting to adopt this document as is with the condition that the water plan come back to us next year once it's actually been fully gone through by council.
I wouldn't like to make that the same motion. I mean, if you want to make another motion, I'd like to keep it separate.
Okay. So that would mean voting on it as is rather than as we had discussed.
Well, you could, it just, to me, it doesn't seem like it should be part of a motion to pass this on.
Okay, how do you want it?
You can have another request to the city council. You can present it any way you want, I guess. You can draft a letter, you can make it.
Part of it too is hearing back, Trish, you guys are going to do a little bit of investigation as far as what is mandated by the state and what we're able to do as far as amending it once it's been submitted, amending our policies specifically, so. I mean, I would also be fine with, I think you hear our ask, and I think that Lindsay and I have communicated.
Yeah.
And you understand what's going on, so if you would like it, so that's kind of what I'm wondering too, is if you would rather have that be a point that you're like, we know what you want, and we will figure out how to get it back to you when and how it's appropriate versus us creating a condition like we did with the parks document.
Right, I think whatever venue, whatever way you want to convey it, I think we know what you want.
Right.
However you want to convey it officially would be fine, I think.
Understanding that they remember what they ask for.
I'm fully aware of
Okay.
that.
Okay, with that, would somebody like to make a motion to accept?
I would make a motion to accept the amendments to the Issaquah Comprehensive Plan, Central Issaquah Sub-Area Plan, and related amendments to the Issaquah Municipal Code and Central Issaquah Standards.
Very good.
I read it off of there.
That was impressive.
Do we have a second?
I'd like to,
Good, okay, double second. Any further, just to make sure, any other further questions, understanding, concerns? With that, the motion's on the table, it's been seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes, so that it will go now to the council and then to Land and Shore.
Correct. Well done.
So our next meeting will be January 24th.
Another public hearing?
And a public hearing. I hope that we have many more than we had tonight to offer their support and concerns and ideas, because that's what this is for, basically, is to get the city involved, people involved in the city to be part of the city.
Right.
So since we are not going to have a meeting in December, I would like to take the opportunity to wish everybody in the city from the Planning Commission a Merry Christmas and a very healthy, Happy New Year.
Thank you.
So with that, I'm going to close the meeting at 7:34.
Okay,
Thank you.
good job. And just while you're thinking, now that we're off